Now we're looking at the doors at St. Michael's in Hildesheim. And what's remarkable about these doors, on the right you see both doors fully set. On the left you see a detail. And what's remarkable is this is returning to the lost wax method being used to cast single sheets of bronze. And each door is a single sheet. Each door is a single sculpture. And the doors are visually paired, where we see the New Testament on the right side and the Old Testament on the left side. And as we look at the doors, we see that pairing. For example, Adam and Eve eating from the forbidden tree is across from the crucifixion. Of course, by eating from the forbidden tree of forbidden knowledge, they create original sin, and then Jesus dying on the cross to rid us of original sin. As we look at the details, the figures are very clumsy. The artistry seems unusual in its, very primitive nature compared to what we've seen in the Renaissance. What we've seen in the Greeks and the Romans. But keep in mind, this is a technology that hasn't been used now for almost 500 years. And sculpture like this is not something that we've seen much of. In this case, on the left, we're seeing the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And the bodies are disproportioned, they're unusual. But again, we don't have a lot of artists, because when society is poor and things are very difficult, very few people will become artists, because it's a highly competitive field and a very difficult field. Why become an artist when you can focus on making shoes or being a farmer, where you have more of a guaranteed income? Also, art isn't that in demand at the time, so you don't have a lot of people creating these pieces. Now we also come to the Gero Crucifix, and this is commissioned by Gero, the Archbishop of Cologne. And what we're going to be looking at is actually a life-size crucifix. And what we see is a wooden crucifix that's then been covered with gesso. Now, gesso, Gesso, is actually a very fluid plaster. It's a mix of calcium carbonate, so chalk, rabbit skin glue, and water. And what they would do is they would paint that on the wood and then sand it down, and it eliminates the grain in the wood in this case and leaves you with a nice white surface, which then can be painted. The back of the head actually contains a cavity, and that is to hold the host, the bread from the Eucharist. And the reason for that is to get around ideas of idolatry. They don't want people praying to this figure as if it's a miraculous figure. So by putting the host in it, you're kind of going around that by saying they're praying to the Eucharist. They're praying to the literal body of Jesus that happens to be stored in the head. And we see a very somber image of suffering death. We have this very heavy figure with sagging skin and folds in the flesh, a very naturalistic form, but one where the artist is probably only looking at themselves for the form. We see that in some of the distortions that take place. You have to put yourself in the place of the artist. There are no mirrors, so the only way to look at yourself is to look down your body. So things closer to your head are going to be in better proportion. For example, the arms and hands are in pretty good proportion here. As we move down, we have the pectoral muscles properly placed, but then we have this rib cage that seems to continue way too far beneath the pectoral muscles. That's because as he's looking down his body, he's going to naturally extend that. The belly is rounded. This is an unusual feature for a crucifixion because, after all, Jesus would have lived a very ascetic lifestyle, very simple lifestyle. But in this case, the artist probably didn't live that simple of a lifestyle and had this bloat to him. So he's depicting that. But he's depicting it lower down. Again, remember, we're looking straight down the human body, so it's naturally elongating as we continue down. The feet, look unusual, the very long toes. And this could just be a general distortion. Maybe they started out being a little too short and he went a little too far. In terms of lifelikeness, this is not our Byzantine crucifixion, where we see the figure well defined and with accurate anatomy. They aren't looking at Greek sculptures as sources, so we're seeing something very, very different. Obviously, those Greek sources will take over and be far more important than what we see in Germany in the medieval period. And this will anticipate Romanesque and Gothic interests later on. This will not be the last crucifixion we look at, and it definitely won't be the last form that we look at for the crucifixion. But now, we need to move on to the Romanesque, in a very different period in European history.